Hello, and welcome to CIFF45 Streams Filmmaker Conversations. I'm Mallory Martin, the Artistic Director for the Cleveland International Film Festival. We want to give special thanks to PNC for sponsoring our Filmmaker Conversations content throughout the festival. On today's special Q&A session, we'll be joined by guests from the documentary In the Dark of the Valley, which is part of our global health competition, Don't Forget to Vote, our Woman of the World sidebar, and our new Democracy's Heroes sidebar, celebrating activists, community organizers, and the heroes fighting for democracy around the world. I'm honored to introduce director, producer, writer, editor, Nicholas Mihm. This is his first feature film, which is incredibly impressive. So thank you for being here, Nicholas, and for sharing your film with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And Melissa Bumstead, the featured subject of the film, the founder of Parents Against Santa Susana Field Lab, and one of those very heroes fighting for democracy that I just mentioned. Thank you for being here, Melissa.
I'm honored. Thank you.
So let's get started. I think everyone who has just watched the film wants to know what the latest updates are, any progress with the cleanup, with new politicians. But even before we get to that, most importantly, how is Gracie doing and how are you doing, Melissa?
Thank you for asking. Gracie's just about 3 years cancer-free. So
yes,
yeah,
it's fantastic.
It's kind of 3 years later, just starting to set in. So the anonymous donor who gave her their bone marrow saved her life.
Wow. So did that happen while the film was being made still, or when did that happen?
Directly after. So you'll see in part of the film where Gracie she's got a steroid face. So she was straight out of the bone marrow transplant.
Wow. That's fabulous news. And how are you doing?
Yeah, every day we just get up and we go, right? As a mom.
Right.
But overall, very well. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so for both of you, do you want to start by letting us know if there are any updates? I know this last year might have put a pause on things in that way, but if you have any updates about the cleanup or sort of with the political environment that you're dealing with these days, I think that's a good place to start.
Nicholas, do you have anything you want to say first?
I mean, you know, it's this last 3 years, it's just been kind of you've been kind of seeing the same thing where the advocates that we talk with, they, are really hopeful about something, about progress being made, and then it gets taken away, and then progress is made, and then it's taken away. And then I feel like the last time that we really chatted about it, Melissa, with the NASA nominating the site as a historical, as historically significant, and trying to kind of get, navigate through these loopholes and their agreements. I think, the last time we talked and where the film kind of ends is, where hope has kind of been taken away. And I think it's just been like this never-ending cycle for you guys, and it's been frustrating to watch from the sidelines, and I'm sure it's frustrating for you guys as well.
Yeah, I'm afraid it's gotten worse. So from that point, but it's really I think it just shows the courage and determination of like Dan and Denise, and you met the three ladies, Holly and Marie and Dawn. I love those women. They've been doing this for 30 years. And the same cycle that I've been dealing with for only 5 years, it's exactly what Nicholas said. Promises are made and nothing happens or goes backwards. For example, right now, Boeing is having behind the door negotiations with the DTSC, which I don't even know how that's democracy. So I think trying to remember who said it, was Caroline who said, if nobody stops them, this is just what they're going to do. And that's just the general attitude. It's shameful.
Yes, I absolutely. And you just reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from the film too, that I think actually Dan might have said, and I wrote it down somewhere and of course can't find it now, but he said something, I think it's at the point of the film where you're personally struggling, Melissa, too, just with all this pressure that's on your shoulders. But, the line about, if you don't fight, then you're always going to lose.
Right.
And so I think that really resonated with me, too, because it was really frustrating to watch. I mean, this happens a lot with activism in general. It's not an easy fix ever.
Right.
But I think especially in your case, it's this film can trigger a lot of angry feelings, I think, for the audience, and especially watching you go through it. But I think what's the alternative? I think you represent that in the film. And if nobody's, if you're not going to fight, who is? So just, again, major kudos to you for continuing the fight, because we can tell that it's not easy. So it's frustrating to hear that you're still in that cycle, but hopefully, there's always hope on the horizon, I think, in some way. And
this film is my hope on the horizon, to be very honest. It really is.
That's great. It's really great to hear. And so again, this is the kind of beginning of the festival circuit, you, Nicholas, and for this film. And you guys are premiering at CineQuest in California soon. I'm guessing I think we might be the second stop on your festival then, on your festival circuit so far. Yeah, so I definitely hope that you're able to show this all over the country, but especially in California, because I think you guys could make some pretty big waves there. Moving on. As I watched the film again recently, I kept wondering how the last year might have affected all of your lives as well, both with the fight, like we just talked about, to get the plant cleaned up, but also how COVID and the California wildfires may have affected both of your lives. So if you both care to talk about that and how this last year has been for you.
Yeah, the last year, obviously it's been devastating for the entire world and entire country, but in terms of the project itself, it was actually kind of a blessing in disguise, because Derek Smith and Brandon Smith, who are my producing partners on this, we all had constant work flowing before the pandemic, and this is a very self-supported film, so it was difficult a lot of the times to sit down and really edit the film. And then when the pandemic happened, we really had no choice, but it really kind of forced us to sit down and bury our heads into it. And I'm really, obviously it was a terrible situation, but it really forced our hand, and I'm grateful for that in that respect. And we've been editing ever since. And so that it was, it's been a lot for the last year. But I'm really, grateful for the opportunity that we got to finish it. And in terms of the wildfires, it was worse than ever last year. And one thing I like to tell people when I talk about the film is that, we obviously filmed a lot with a lot of people, a lot of experts, a lot of scientists, including one Nobel Peace Prize winning scientist, Tillman Ruff, who's from Australia, who Melissa knows. And we had to take him out of the film just for time. But one of the things that he tells us is that, climate change and with these fires is just getting worse and worse every year. That just kind of increases the threat level from the site, just because that vegetation is holding in all that material. And it's, when that burns, it aerosolizes and, goes up into the atmosphere. So, so it's with climate change and with how dry California is and is, continuing to get drier and drier, it's going to be, that threat is just ever prevalent, and it's going to get worse and worse. So, it's just something to keep in mind when you're watching the film, that, that stuff is still up there. So, and we need to get it cleaned up so it's doesn't cause a threat to the surrounding communities anymore.
Right. And so, Melissa, I apologize not knowing this, but was the Simi Valley affected at all from the most recent wildfires?
No, but Dan Hirsch in the film, you see him going into those little cabins where he just has thousands and thousands and thousands of files. The fire burned right up to those. And the firefighters saved his house and saved all those, those documents that we can't get anymore.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
it was intense.
Incredible.
And then he was evacuated after that for the mudslides. So in addition to the fires, just global warming in general is going to make contamination across America that much more dangerous because of, flooding and the fires and the winds and tornadoes. That just is going to increase the migration of that contamination.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because, being in Ohio, we're quite far away from it, but through reading the news and everything, like there wasn't obviously mention here, at least, about anything to do with contamination concern. I mean, I think when you're in a catastrophe like that and death is very close to your face, you're not thinking about the future as much. But I also think, having watched this film as well recently, again, that brought things up to me too, that maybe, yeah, okay, you survive a wildfire and your house is saved, but what does that mean for the future, depending on where you live in California or across the world, like you said. So,
Right.
So yeah. And Melissa, can you talk a little bit about what your family's life has been like this last year with COVID, and especially with Gracie being, compromised? Have you guys kind of just holed up at home this whole time, or?
Yeah. Between her being high risk from the bone marrow transplant, which is debatable, hypothetically, she has a fully functioning immune system, but that's just always, there's that question in the back of your mind. And then my son and I are both high risk from asthma. Yeah, we've been hermits. We're kind of used to it, to be honest. I have a little bit of a hard time sympathizing with people who don't want to wear masks, because we wore masks for 4 years. We isolated for years and years, and I understand the hardship. I know that it's hard for people, but I think sometimes it was a little bit a glimpse into the pediatric cancer world for everyone to see, like, yeah, imagine this plus your child being, deathly ill, afraid of germs, afraid of people coming over. So we did okay.
Right.
Kind of, COVID good. And unfortunately, I feel like that SNL skit where what's the actress's name? She's so funny, and she goes, "Well, that didn't really happen for me, with the alien abduction and stuff. Because, like, my time was great." Well, that wasn't really our case, because the polluters and the DTSC, this is like their favorite time to pull shenanigans. We saw this at last Christmas, or was it 2 years ago? It was between the Newsom taking over, being sworn in, that exact 2 weeks between Christmas and New Year's, they tried to publish one of the EISs. And thankfully, at that point, we had made contact with Newsom's chief of staff and asked him to intervene, and he did. But it seems that, they've been going full steam. They haven't, this is their favorite time to do stuff, because they know the public is really busy and really struggling, and they can try to slide it through a lot easier for them. And that just always makes it more difficult, for us trying to protect the community while struggling ourselves.
Right. So it's almost like they're using this distraction, but the important role,
right,
even more so for you now, is to make sure that people are still paying attention.
Yeah. It's
Wow. Okay, so can you two both talk a little bit about the origin of all this, how you two both met? And I know just from reading some background on you, Nicholas, that I believe it was when you were doing filming the Change.org promotional video. So is that when you two met, and is that how this kind of the film sparked from there?
Yeah. So this started what Melissa, February 2018, I think, is when we first met. And Grace was still right in the middle of treatment. So we actually had been hired by Change.org through a site called Story Hunter. And we have the three of us, me, Derek, and Brandon, the two producers on the film. We're looking for projects, and we found that on Story Hunter. They hired us to film a little petition video with Melissa, just to highlight the petition, get people to sign up and be activated. But they asked us to do this two minute piece, and then we got there. We sat with Melissa. We talked with you for probably an hour and 15 minutes, just like right off the bat, and then also with Denise. And you kind of realized when we jumped into post on that project that there's way too much information. The story is way too big for a 2 minute piece and 2 minute little docu-film. So it ended up being 7 minutes. We were able to negotiate it. And then even that, like, obviously still, there was still not enough time to get all the information in that we wanted to get in. And that kind of really kicked it off for us. And we just realized how awesome Melissa was and how brave she was. And we wanted to follow up with it. And so I think we started filming again in August of 2018 and kind of never stopped. from that point on. And, you know, we're just amazingly grateful of how, you know, welcoming and open Melissa and her family have been, and all the other families too that are featured in the film. You know, it's been from that little internet piece, it's been quite the journey. And then change.org was really gracious enough to actually let us use some of those interviews in the film, in the final film. We were able to get that footage from them because there's, you know, with Grace being where she was at the time of her treatment, you know, and you had that really beautiful moment where she sits on your lap at the beginning of the movie. It's just like, those are moments you can't recreate. So we're really, really grateful that change.org was willing to let us use the footage in the feature. So, yeah.
That's great. And the change.org video, Melissa, do you feel like that's what sort of helped kickstart things for you too, in terms of getting that many signatures?
Yeah, absolutely. And the change.org, I think a lot of people think, you know, what do petitions really do? But it really got our elected officials' attention. And, you know, when we're fighting against the influence of polluters, there has to be that, you know, to even get an audience, we have to have enough community support that they're afraid that they're going to get not reelected next year. And so without that petition, we wouldn't be where we are today. It's been really a miracle.
So
and shout out to Juliana who put this all together for us, who introduced the two of us and at change.org, and she's a rock star as well, and she got this all going. So we owe a lot to her, I think.
Yeah,
that's really great. Amazing. Good. Well, and yeah, I love what you said in the film too, Melissa, where you're like, oh wait, 250,000? No, 650,000, and now they're paying attention. So do you know what is it still at around 650,000 signatures? I
think we're at 730 right now.
That's great.
But hoping to hit 1 million.
Okay.
And again, it's pretty radical that we have this many signatures and still Boeing isn't really bothered. I think that's been a hardship we have because we can't boycott their products. You know, it's pretty impossible to do. So, and they know the influence, they know the political power they have. We're still not very threatening to them, but we will be. And I think this film is what's going to make the difference. Dan always says there's political power and money power, and there's people power. And I really believe in that. I really believe that people power is what makes the change, and that we can come against huge forces like Boeing and NASA and the Department of Energy and see real lasting change when we work together.
Yeah, there's I think it's a Margaret Mead quote about saying that, you know, don't ever underestimate the power that a small group of people can have to change the world. In fact, that's the only thing that ever has changed the world. So I think that's really great. And I think what I was going to ask about the signatures in particular is that I'm imagining that started within your community, but that's grown outside of the Valley. And so is it still mostly Californians that are signing it, or to get to that million, are you trying to expand? And obviously, hopefully this film will help awareness around that as well. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we do have a worldwide support right now with signatures. It's still not a household name. But, you know, like Nicholas showed in the film, there's so many other communities suffering in the same way. So I think there's been some bonding there. I've been able to meet some really amazing moms doing the same kind of work across the nation. Some really amazing pediatric cancer research is starting now because of just people are kind of realizing the link between the two. I think the same realization is happening across the nation all at the same time. But interestingly, we don't have as much local support as you would think for the cleanup. And that's been really difficult. I think people here are terrified. You know, it's really, really hard to admit every morning while you send your kids off to school, like, hope you don't get contaminated today. You know, your brain can't handle that. Right. So you just kind of shut down. But I feel like there is a lot more hope in the community than there used to be. There's also a lot of people who own very, very expensive homes out here. Some of the most expensive are right next to the field lab. There's a whole bunch of mansions up there. And, you know, I have to wonder if, sorry. It's okay.
That's all.
Gracie, I'm sorry, Gracie needs to sharpen a pencil for school. Go ahead, real quick.
That's okay.
Thank you. I have to wonder if these people with very, very expensive homes, are some of the people in the community that have pushed back because they realize their property value is going to go down if people start to associate this area with contamination. And second of all, the cleanup is going to affect their view, and that will also affect their property value. So, and something that Nicholas doesn't really cover in the film, but there's been a lot of astroturfing. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. There's grassroots, and the fake guys who are paid by the polluters are astroturfers. And Boeing and Department of Energy have invested quite a bit in the community to really have an active astroturfing population here. But thankfully, it's like people out here are so reasonable, and we have a very educated, very affluent population. Malibu's like 10 miles away, if that. Thousand Oaks, Westlake Village, Calabasas, these are all very, very affluent areas. And once they get the facts, we can show them all the facts. They can read it, they can understand it. The astroturfers have lost a lot of ground because the facts are there.
That's interesting. And thank you for, go ahead, Nicholas.
Yeah, I was just going to say the other part of it is that, it's pretty amazing how many people we've talked to during this whole process that live in the area, that live in West Hills, that live in Chatsworth, it's right below, live in Simi Valley, that don't even know that the site is up there. It's if you've lived there for a few decades, it's there. But if you're new to the neighborhood, or if you've only lived there for a certain number of years, then a lot of people just don't know it's there, including people who worked on our film. Like there's crew members that grew up there and had no idea. The individual that did our aerial photography, CJ Roy, he filmed that stuff. He didn't even know what it was until we kind of brought it to his attention. So I think there is just an awareness issue right now, which the film is going to help. The petition is going to help with, but it's just some people just don't know it's there. It's really hidden up there in those rock outcroppings. Right. And
a lot of people think it's urban legend. My mom and dad both grew up here, and they were surprised to find out, or a lot of people think it's already been cleaned because that's what the polluters said they would do, and then there's a lot of people whose grandparents and parents work there. They don't want to talk about it. And then we have a very young population of young families who move out here because it's close to work, great schools, great community, and nobody tells them when they get here. So like Nicholas said, it's really shocking how few people know about the Santa Susana Field Lab.
And that's a great segue into my next question, and I think, Melissa, you had even said in the film that it was 7 years before that you were living there, right? Before you knew about it? Is that how long it was? Okay.
Well, and I have to wonder now, because I think I said 7 years because that's when Nicholas did the film. And so I was thinking 7 years. We were there for 4 years, but I also grew up in Thousand Oaks, which is literally the same distance we are here, but on the other side. And when my mom had like a precancerous gum lesions all over her mouth when she was 10, nobody said Santa Susana Field Lab. When I had an autoimmune disease and had to have my spleen taken out, nobody thought Santa Susana Field Lab. When my mom had brain cancer and two of my aunts, an aunt and uncle, passed away from cancer, it's like nobody associated those things with it.
And I'm actually going to go away from what I was just about to ask you, because it made me think too about, that was a thought I had when watching the film, is what are the doctors thinking? I mean, when all these kids are showing up with these very rare diseases, and a lot of them are, and, they have to have an idea that it's a large hospital, but still, even from talking with parents, did you ever get a sense that hospitals know about this?
The nurses do. The nurses would tell me whenever there was a lot of wind, they would see all the brain cancers come in a group.
Wow.
But at that time, and this is slowly starting to change, but it's still widely believed that it is a mutation in the mitosis. Is that it? The cell splitting. That it's a fluke, and just something happened. It was really hard for me the other day. I was reading, I found a 2008-2009 presidential cancer study, and it talked about how they know that the environment is causing cancers, how prevalent it is, how big of an issue it is. And it really broke my heart, because the evidence is there. There's actually quite a few studies on, childhood cancer has risen 35%, and thyroid cancers, which are almost always caused by radiation, are on the rise. And, you just read study after study, and still there's just, I don't know what it's going to take to shift it for people to finally say, what if most pediatric cancers are caused by environmental contamination? I personally believe that. And there's mounting evidence to show that. And I kind of forgot what your original question was, so I hope that answered it.
No, that's okay. You did, about the nurses mentioning something, because that was
right.
I was thinking about the hospital's role in that as well, and do they have a responsibility to sound an alarm, when that's happening?
Well, again, you have a lot of corruption, and not in the hospitals. In California, they're legally required to report all cancers. There's a California Cancer Registry. However, when Dr. Hal Morgenstern was doing the study that showed a 60% higher cancer incidence rate in this area, he was denied access to the pediatric numbers. And that is because a certain professor over at USC, who I don't really want to call out, but is mentioned in the documentary on some of the paperwork, he doesn't believe that cancer can really be caused by environmental problems. He said that our pediatric cancer cluster doesn't look remarkable to him. He has given public speeches here. He's talked to the Children's Hospital here, advised them that there's nothing abnormal. And he was the one who started the California Cancer Registry and did not allow Dr. Hal Morgenstern to have access to that. So it's all the gears have to be functioning for this problem really to be solved. And when you have any one person, stopping some of the gears, and how can you blame the doctors if they're being told no by a leading epidemiologist that this isn't a problem?
Right. No, that's a really good point about all the gears working together. So my original question that I was going to go to next too was more of a point to start out, which is, I know the answer is that this is part of a decades-long cover-up, but it's still crazy to me that nobody knows about this. Being in Ohio, we were closer to the 3 Mile Island instance, of course, and that's, everybody knows about that. But I think also in the film, when you see it, the numbers, and you see how much more devastating this was too, it's still, I can't fathom why this is not something that is more well known. And I do think that in a way, Melissa, you called it sort of your worst nightmare about the Woolsey fire, but also in a way it seemed to be something that kind of got things moving again for you guys. And I think, also a tweet from a Kardashian doesn't hurt as well. So
they're such nice ladies.
That's great. Okay. So can you guys talk a little bit more about how that changed things for you? Both Woolsey fire, but also Kim Kardashian's tweet, which is huge. It's nothing to balk at. That kind of stuff can make things happen. And if there's been any more high profile support for the cause or anything like that, if you can talk about that a little bit.
Pretty much the Kardashians have been our biggest celebrity supporters. And I think what happened with them is the same reason why the community became a lot more active, is because when you realize it's happening near you and your children are at risk, all the parents stand up and say, now it's time to fight. We had it somewhat similar when the people in Simi Valley realized that all the elementary schools are on Golden State water, and 30% of the population, they're drinking mixed well water. And I happen to know that company is not doing their diligence of really testing that water to make sure it's safe enough. But the Kardashians wanted to learn more. They're very intelligent ladies, very, very good moms. They really were concerned about their kids, and were just gracious enough to lend their support to our cause. It really did, really made a big difference for us. Again, I'm so grateful for them.
It's great. And Nicholas, it seemed like that was something that happened during the course of you filming. Mm-hmm. So what was that like for you as a filmmaker?
It was completely insane, because I think Joel Grover says it, the guy from NBC, he says, before the fire, not a lot was happening. And we had spent a lot of time with Melissa, but in terms of like the government level, not a lot was happening. In terms of the public level, not a lot of people were paying attention. And then when you hear the news that a fire started not only near the site but on the site itself, I mean, that is enough to scare anybody. So I mean, it's kind of it's just really unfortunate that's what had to happen for people to kind of pay attention. But kind of like what I said before with COVID giving us a chance to edit the film, it's kind of like these really terrible events kind of for the movement and for the film are somewhat blessing in disguise, because they get people to kind of open up their eyes a little bit and not take this comfort that you have all the time for granted, because a wildfire can change that in a second. And so yeah, it was really insane. We were kind of thrust into it all of a sudden. It was a few days here and there that we'd film with Melissa, and then suddenly it was every day, or like multiple times a week. Meetings were happening weekly, and so it was crazy. And it was just kind of unfortunate that that's what had to happen to open people's eyes.
Right. So Melissa, it seemed as though a part of the film that I really resonated and just felt kind of more connected to you in, and and I give props to Nicholas for bringing this out in the film, is that it seemed as though there's been times along your journey that you felt maybe a bit like a pawn, or that could have been something that was happening, and that you'd really like to be able to reject all the politics of it all. How do you feel about your role in this fight nowadays, and is it difficult for you to stay grounded?
I think I'm really blessed and fortunate to have such amazing people around me. Jenny Knack in the film, she's become one of my closest friends. Denise is like family. Dan, we spend our vacations with him. I would be lost without these people. And my role is, I just see it as a responsibility more. And I really believe in servant leadership, where it's my job to help empower people and to train people. And I don't have to be a big person to do that, and I can train other people to be great leaders in this issue, and being advocates and learning about how to protect our kids. So in that sense, I feel more comfortable with my role, I guess I could say. At the beginning, everything was terrifying. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I tried to get out of advocacy, to be honest. I really tried to run away from it. That first meeting when I learned about the Santa Susana Field Lab with those 7 other cancer moms, to be honest, I didn't do anything for a year. It was just too traumatic, I didn't have the heart, and I didn't have a science background. I didn't know who to trust. And those things make it really difficult. And one of the things I have tried to do is I realized, one, everybody thought it was just scientists arguing, kind of like, are eggs good for you or not? Every week it seems to change. Because we didn't know who to trust, because we don't speak science.
Right.
And nobody saw the face of it. And that's where I realized, Gracie's story. And I hate it that part comes up where, like, am I using Grace? Gracie said, by the way, Nicholas, if anyone asks that, she'll come over and kick their butts.
And she will too. She's tough.
She's actually very, I think it helps empower her to feel like she has a way to cope with everything that's happened to her. Gosh, I lost my point again. What you're saying? Oh, that I was afraid of it. I tried to get away from it. I've changed a lot. I just couldn't see myself being in this position. But again, it's because of the mentorship and the support and the encouragement. My mom is at every single event we have. My dad is there 9 out of 10. I wouldn't be able to have taken those risks if I didn't have such great support. And again, the people, like, every gear has to work. Dr. Morgenstern did an amazing job, and Dan's been doing this forever. And Michael Rose, who first found the meltdown, he did. It's like everyone, when you do your part, even if you don't know that you're part of the bigger, I'm so sorry. It's my doctor's, the medicine. Just one sec, sorry.
Oh, it just showed up. No, that's okay.
Hello?
We can pause.
This is her mom. Sorry, Gracie. Gracie has to start growth hormone therapy, and the radiation and the chemotherapy just completely destroyed her ability to make growth hormone, which not only affects her height, but actually affects like her metabolism and cholesterol and heart attacks. Like, it's crazy. She has to get injections every day for the next 5 years to deal with that. So the medicine was supposed to be delivered today. They just said they're bringing it tomorrow, but it has to be refrigerated, which is why I'm all nervous about it. And it's our first time starting it. So sorry about that.
No, don't apologize at all. It's incredible that, if it just keeps going, you know.
It will the rest of her life.
Yeah.
That's another issue I can get into later.
Okay. Well, I'll get us kind of back on track. And I'm glad that you also brought up the question that, as a viewer, I will say I'm actually happy was posed in the film about, whether you're using Gracie's story, but I think your response is just perfect because you're not shying away from it. And in many ways, at least as a viewer, I feel too that Gracie's story is also yours, as her mother. And I think that, when you think about it in the frame of the fact that you're not only trying to help save your daughter, but you're also trying to help save other daughters and sons. And I think that's, anyways, I just wanted to let you know that I think that was a great response. And I don't think you should shy away from giving that answer if somebody ever does ask that, but hopefully Gracie will beat them up first. So you don't have to worry about that. And speaking of Gracie, I just kind of wanted to ask about that too. You already kind of said like how she's felt about all of this too. And I just want to kind of ask you if you think, as she's getting older as well too, and getting closer to those teenage years, do you think that how do you think she feels personally about this at this point? And do you think it's ever something that she just doesn't want to have to think about and deal with anymore? Or do you think that she is just like her mom and going to follow in your footsteps and be her own activist?
We're just giving her freedom to choose. I now ask her before I take any picture of her getting medical stuff. I ask her before it gets posted. She's at that age where I really want to respect her privacy. And if she says she doesn't want to be part of the fight, I completely respect that. She's got to have the freedom to live her own life. And we've worked really, really hard to make sure her identity isn't dependent on cancer. We want her to have, like a regular, healthy life. So right now she is very interested, but I'm still careful with how much information I bring home because it makes my kids nervous. They know that sometimes I get yelled at these meetings, or sometimes I'm treated really rudely. And unfortunately, one meeting I went to, somebody had a gun and they had to barricade us in. And it ended up just being this, they didn't have a gun, but they thought I had a gun. And so I called my husband and I was like really freaked out. They heard about it somehow. So I have to be careful as a mom to like let them be as involved as they want, but shield them from a lot of it too. And sometimes I do better at that than other times, as I don't really have a manual on how to do that perfectly. But I am really proud of my kids, and every time that Gracie, you might have seen her speaking at a few of those meetings, that was exactly what she wanted to do. And those were her words. And, I'm really proud for my kids when they do feel like making change. They're pretty awesome at it.
That's so great. So, Nicholas, I have a specific question for you around the inclusion of the interview with Ann White, the former Department of Energy. I think she was the Assistant Secretary for Environmental Management. Yep. I just thought that interview was super intriguing, and I think it was a great layer to the film. Can you talk about a little bit more about how you got to her and what that
Sure.
interview was like? Some people in Ohio might know too, because I think part of her leaving had to do with the Portsmouth, Ohio plant, and there was contamination there. And I believe she was sort of forced out, to my knowledge, because of disagreements with how that was handled. So can you just talk a little bit more about that interview?
Yeah. Well, I'll first start by saying that Ms. White, she was awesome. It was really awesome of her to participate, and we were really grateful. She's a lovely person, and yeah, we had first heard her name when we were in DC with Melissa and a group called Alliance for Nuclear Accountability. And you know, and Melissa, I think you were supposed to have a meeting with her, and there's some, you know, there seemed to be some drama around it, and then she couldn't show up because of Portsmouth. And she actually had to go to Ohio to deal with that situation, and then later she resigned. But so you know, it was a name that was on our radar for a little bit, and you know, we weren't having any luck with government officials wanting to participate in the film, for obvious reasons. So you know, and so you know, we got no responses from Boeing, got no responses from NASA, or they responded, but they didn't want to participate. And she was the only one. And because she wasn't, you know, in that seat any longer, she was willing to chat with us. And, you know, we flew over to Knoxville, Tennessee to see her. And you know, she gave some enlightening answers. There's a lot more to that interview that I wish we could fit in the film, but, you know, just being an hour and 40 minutes, you know, we there's only so much we can fit in. But yeah, you know, we really wanted to get that nationwide perspective from her. You know, what is that root problem, you know, within government that's slowing all this stuff down? And you know, with Santa Susana specifically, she couldn't really speak to Santa Susana specifically, and she didn't have like the data on hand, you know, right there. But you know, what she did say was, you know, the reason nobody knows what Santa Susana is, or what, you know, the field lab is because it's, in the grand scheme of things, it's a small site. It's pretty, you know, insignificant. It's not even on the national priority list when it comes to Superfund sites around the country. You know, when you compare it to sites like Hanford and Washington, which is like the size of Rhode Island, you know,
so bad.
Santa Susana is just not going to get the same kind of recognition those sites are getting. And because there's so many of these sites, you know, it's I guess, you know, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess it's a lot to prioritize. You know, it's you know, how do you say, hey, this is worse than your site, or my site's worse than your site? You know, and then, you know, and we really wanted to get out of her was, you know, the government response is just so slow.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I had read about her, and I had read about how, you know, like the situation behind her resignation, and how, you know, they just don't encourage this one-on-one communication with community members and advocates like Melissa. And, you know, that's where this disconnect comes from. It's just their lack of communication, or their lack of being willing to communicate. Excuse me. And you know, I think it speaks a lot to Melissa that, you know, someone like Melissa in a small site like Santa Susana in a town like West Hills, California, outside Los Angeles, can make enough of a difference in her community to kind of reach that level. Like, you know, there was a point where she had heard of Melissa, and that says a lot, because it's really difficult for these advocates to break through. And so, you know, that speaks a lot to, you know, how powerful you are, Melissa. So and how much influence you have. But yeah, but we were really grateful that she was the only, you know, former government official to actually want to speak to us. And you know, I hope it like opens eyes, and you know, our audience's eyes, and brings awareness to, you know, you might be closer to one of these sites than you think, because they're all over the place.
Yeah.
And so if you want something done, you need to, that barrier has to break down between the government and its people and this lack of communication. We're grateful that she was able to shed a light on that a little bit.
Can I throw something in too?
Mm-hmm.
That's why we're taking this cleanup so seriously. Is out of everyone that I've talked to, we probably have the best shot of getting a cleanup, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. We have Kardashians, we have elected officials, we have Hollywood, we have, I'm fortunate enough to be a stay-at-home mom. We're in a financial place where a lot of the moms can come to these meetings, or dads, and again, an affluent and educated community that really cares about the environment. Across the not just the Navajo Nation, across the indigenous people all across America, there's been decades and decades of uranium mining, and they have had no voice. They have had no progress. In Savannah, Georgia, where we unfortunately, Nicholas didn't get to show meeting Annie Laura. All of her family died from cancer. She lives near 2 Superfund sites on the Savannah River. They've had no progress, and when you look everywhere and see that what's happening to us is not just common, but maybe even worse for them and their situation, we're hoping and praying, like all of us involved, that this will set a new precedent across America, and that what happens here in our community will help protect people all over the nation.
Yeah. So, I mean, you make the point in the film that this kind of corporate and government negligence is likely happening all over the country, which could not be more true, as you just stated too. I mean, even in Ohio, we've dealt with a pretty big scandal this last year with the Ohio House Bill 6, which was designed to basically bail out First Energy and their 2 nuclear plants in Ohio. And even our Speaker of the House was arrested in last July for taking bribery money, and yet he was just reelected in November. So we are well aware of the scandals that can happen around this kind of stuff. So my last question for you, Melissa, specifically, is if there's someone watching this film or this Q&A right now who felt the same way that you did at the beginning of all this 5 or so years ago, but just doesn't know where to start, what advice would you give to them?
It really comes down to our elected officials and making noise, and not just calling once and saying you're concerned, but calling, every month and saying you're concerned, telling people, taking the time to educate your community. We have to become strong enough as a people that we put enough pressure on elected officials that we're at least an equal pressure, like when that Boeing could fund your political opponent's reelection campaign, if you say anything about the pollution, we need to have enough weight against the politicians to say, well, you're either not going to get reelected from them or you're not going to get reelected from us. So you're going to have to, at least they can make a little bit more of a choice. And I think that's what matters the most is coming together as a united voice, finding people in your community that are willing to do the same thing and just not giving up. It can be really overwhelming sometimes. And it's just that every day waking up and saying, our kids are worth the fight. And it can happen. I'm seeing it. I am starting to see moms make big differences and dads too. But I think there's something about that mama bear kind of intuition that really kicks in.
Yeah. Okay. And lastly, for both of you, how can people watching support your direct cause? Is the change.org petition the best place to start? Where should they be going?
Yeah, the change.org/Santa Susana. We send out updates about once a month at least about what's going on, who you can contact. And then we have our website, parentsagainstssfl.com, where again, we have a lot of resources. I'm trying to really make sure there's all the studies, all the reports, everything, because we want other people who are trying to find information to have those resources to empower them in their own fights. So that'd be great.
Okay, we will direct our audience there for sure. Well, I cannot thank you both enough for everything that you're doing, for sharing your time with us today, and for sharing this incredible film with our audience. I just wish you both every ounce of luck and strength and good health that I can possibly send your way And I just want to say thank you to all the families who shared their stories in the film as well, and especially to Gracie and Hazel for sharing their stories and their bravery too. So thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mallory.
Lastly, I also want to thank you, our audience, for joining us for today's Q&A. We wouldn't be here without your ongoing support to bring film home. Please consider supporting our challenge match presented by Cuyahoga Arts and Culture to support the future of our festival. Our goal is to reach $145,000 this year, and we are so grateful for any amount that you're able to contribute. To donate, purchase tickets, or check out our full schedule of filmmaker conversations like this one, please visit clevelandfilm.org. With that, please stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.